This is Bob Hartman from Petra. You're listening to Classic Christian Rock Podcast with Wildman and Steve.
Hello, everybody. We want to welcome you to the Classic Christian Rock Podcast. I'm looking forward once again to another great episode. Steve Perkins is with me once again. How are you doing today, Steve?
You know, I am doing just fine, Wild Man. It's a chance to talk classic Christian rock with some brothers in faith. So what could possibly be wrong?
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and I was thinking, this show is becoming so popular now, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
You know, I had a meeting with all of our listeners last night, and both of them agreed. No, seriously, folks, we have been excited about how this show has been growing since we started in January, based on the downloads, and it has been exciting how God has been using this, and it's just been organic, and I appreciate that. Steve, you're going to have to help me out. Is there a Latin way to say organic?
You know there is, but I tell you what, we'll keep it simple for the folks at home, and we'll just leave it in English.
Simple is always good. Yeah. Well, folks, we have a guest with us today, and his name is Jason Fowler. You probably have seen him with his solo music. He does worship-style solo music. And I'm sure if you've followed someone like John Schlitt or Billy Smiley with their project of the Union of Sinners and Saints, you have seen Jason Fowler because he has been with them. He has toured with them and has been in the studio with them and really has added a tremendous component to the ministry. And we're just excited to have you with us here, Jason. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. It's so great to be here and great to be with you, Wild Man and Steve.
Yeah, thank you for coming. We appreciate you taking the time. And wanted to start just a bit. This is a general question that musicians typically get asked, but this is what I'm always curious about. What was it that got you inspired to do music in the first place?
Well, I grew up in a musical family. My uncle played guitar. His nickname was Slide, and being from the South, only maybe an hour away from Macon, we grew up on the Allman Brothers. And my other uncle, Chris, plays piano. My dad sings very well, and just been in a musical family all my life and grew up around music, as well as we would go over to my grandmother's house, and they would be playing old spirituals or it would break out into an Allman Brothers tune. And so from an early age, I've always just been around music and loved music.
Okay, you already started us off on a great direction. You said Allman Brothers. All right, we're going on a whole new thing now. So Allman Brothers, talk to us a little bit about, and I'm going to throw several terms out there, but country and western, southern rock, southern gospel. There's so much overlap in a lot of those styles there. Talk to us a little bit specifically about how some of those styles influenced you, and particularly if there's been any other bands, secular or Christian, in addition to the Allman Brothers.
Well, I grew up going to church, and I grew up actually my first, it was the second and third grade. I went to a Christian school and everything. So growing up in music, if you're from the South, I mean, you love like the Allman Brothers Band. I mean, it would even be something like Hank Williams Jr., as well as rock bands like AC/DC, and then moving into, whether it was Foreigner, the Allman Brothers Band, Leonard Skinner, but also anything that was riff rock bass driven, which I believe it's like a melting pot of the blues, gospel, R&B, as well as riff rock, just in your face, simple, just songs about life and hardship and overcoming them. I think that that's where a lot of the Southern roots come from in music for me, is just music that you felt when you listened to it. And so a lot of the influences have come from rock and roll, as well as some blues and R&B and different things like that early on in my life. So.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think it's hard to separate those things out. And you threw even more, genres in there. And I think musicians know this. I think real fans of music recognize this. I think a lot of fans may just listen to music and go, hey, I know I like it, and may not really know all the styles or know why. But, I mean, that's exactly right. Obviously with the blues, certainly starting in the South, migrating north over time, and the influence of those. It's interesting to me to hear artists who may have found their professional niche in one area, but everybody keeps coming back to some of those same things musically and lyrically that were their influences. And I just find that really interesting.
Yeah, it's been a spectrum for me too. I mean, it would range anywhere from, Eric Clapton, Cream, Led Zeppelin to AC/DC to anything that had a guitar in it, Joe Satriani, and then it developed into some of the hair metal, in the 80s, in the late 80s, and then it went into a lot of the grunge rock, and I've just always focused around my musical styles around the guitar. And being early in my career too, when I was growing up and started playing guitar and different things like that, at 16 is when I started playing guitar. I actually heard somebody playing, I think it was Sweet Home Alabama, and I said, whatever that is, I want to do that. That riff, just the starting riff, got me, I think music is one of those things that it can enter into your mind and your heart and your soul and change the way that you feel without even your permission. And it just is the universal language. And so with all the different styles that I grew up with, I mean, there was also things like, Michael Jackson and music that had a meaning and a groove. I would always think that the groove came first and the riff came first, and then I would listen to a lot of the melodies and then the lyrics and everything. And so a lot of secular music is what I grew up on. But I think now that I listen back on a lot of those, I'm hearing so many spiritual overtones, because I think even bands like U2 and different bands like that who have shaped a lot of the modern worship, whether it's, John Schlitt coming from Head East to Petra, and, White Cross, and just different early Christian classic rock like that. I think it's all influenced by a lot of the older blues and even some of the country and even some of the R&B.
Yeah, it's something to see how things connect like that. And it's amazing today, Jason, how people have the ability to do that. They have the ability because of the internet and because of the smartphones and social media. Kids today can look back and can see how things connect. But I know that, from our era, we weren't too aware of that. I mean, I grew up listening to Petra, and I never realized that they had the influence that they did until later on, where that came from. You listen to an artist and you think that, hey, they're the first ones to play that chord, or they're the first ones to play that melody like that. But it's amazing how music overlaps. How would you say your music, what's the influence of your music currently in comparison to what you just explained?
Well, I feel like once there is a melodic riff type of melody in a song, and a lot of times I come up with it on acoustic or electric, and I believe that the influence from that, you could trace it all the way back to maybe an Eric Clapton riff, or you could trace it back to an early blues song. I know that groups like Led Zeppelin actually did a lot of that, where they played a lot of the early blues, and they were spiritual songs, which is funny because a lot of people don't realize that the origins of a lot of the riffs and a lot of the melodies and a lot of the progressions that we are playing today come from spirituals and early blues spiritual songs. And see, that's when you trace it back like that. I think a lot of my influence comes from things, music that moves, and when you hear it, it just moves you, and it makes you, put you in a place. It almost paints a picture for you without too much description, but allows you to fall into a place that is different from your normal everyday thoughts. And when it does that, it takes you on a journey. And when you add the lyrics in there and the melody into it, especially with the message of being about redemption, grace, what Jesus has done on the cross, where I was being lost and where I was being found and being blind, but now I see, even in Amazing Grace, something as simple as a song like that is so powerful because the message comes through and the movement comes through the music, but the lyrics, when you start to really focus on that, it's the message of the good news, the gospel.
60, 59, 58, 57.
Hey, wild man.
55, 54,
Hey,
53,
hey, wild man.
52, 51.
Hey, wild man.
Yes, Steve.
What are you doing?
Oh, I'm just taking a minute.
What?
Yeah, and not just any minute, mind you. I'm taking a Christian minute.
Christian minute? Could you explain?
Man, I tell you, sometimes I wonder about you, Steve. Do you even listen to our show? We've talked about this on our last couple episodes.
Really?
Yes. You remember ChristianMinute.com?
Wild man,
And I must say, I think it's good because, you can't expect someone to be Christian all day, especially in the workplace. So thank God there's a podcast now that teaches us how to be Christian for 1 minute. Then we can go back to whatever attitude we desire.
Yeah, wild man, I hate to tell you this, but it's actually ChristianMenAtWork.com.
Huh?
Yes, ChristianMenAtWork.com. They're teaching men how to be Christians all the time, especially in the workplace. Come on, man. You're a pastor. You should know this.
Well, I was thinking...
Jesus himself taught that to follow him means to deny oneself.
Well, right. Yeah, I get that. But for more than a minute?
Yes, wild man, for much more than a minute. Actually, he didn't give a time limit. Being Christian means our entire life, especially where we spend most of our time, on the job. Wild man, what are you doing?
I'm looking for the non-Christian Minute website. I need a minute, or maybe there's a non-Christian hour. I mean, this has been a long day. I'm sure there's a podcast about the non-Christian hour.
Oh, man.
Find the Men at Christian Work podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Find out more information at ChristianMenAtWork.com. Yeah, that's great how it works out that way, and how God has given us music and all of those different styles, so for the purpose of redirecting it back to Him, as you said, for the gospel.
Amen.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, Jason, because I'm a guitarist myself. I've played since I was about 14, 15, around the same time you probably started, and I've always been amateur. I thought I was going to hit the road someday, and then God had other plans for me, and I just followed what God wanted. But just out of curiosity for the musicians that are listening, or for the guitarists that are listening, what has it been like for you, the recording process? Going in the studio, recording, laying down tracks. What has that experience been like for you?
Well, it's definitely a learning experience, like with anything you go into, and you have a certain thought on it as to how it's going to go. And then it ends up going a different way. And a lot of times when you get there in the middle of an idea that you think is going to be the part of the guitar, track, it ends up developing into something else. And I think that the other instruments moving around within the song and working with a producer